Get everything you need for your next job without the hassle at AquaBlueMosaics.com. We carry everything from high-quality pool tile, porcelain pavers, grout, fire and water features, and everything in between that you need to get your project done and put some money in your pocket. A literal showroom in the palm of your hand, we are the most powerful tool any pool contractor can have in their pocket. Become an Aqua Pro and save money on every order, get free samples, and have full access to our unmatched customer service. Easy to remember, hard to forget. Visit AquaBlueMosaics.com.
Welcome back to the Pool Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Joe Trusty, editor of Pool Magazine. And with me today is Dr. Adam Katchmarchi. He's a pool safety evangelist and an expert when it comes to all things drowning prevention. May is National Pool Safety Month, and today we're joined by one of the country's leading voices in that category. You know, drowning is the leading cause of accidental death of children ages 1 to 4. Many of these tragedies are preventable. Whether you're a parent, guardian, grandparent, pool professional, or simply someone who loves being around the water, you're going to want to hear what Dr. Katchmarchi has to say about keeping kids safe this swim season. Pleasure to have you back with us today on the show, Adam.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Happy to be back with you.
For those who don't know, why is National Pool Safety Month so important? And what's the biggest message that you want pool owners and pool professionals to take away this month?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially, we have such a huge geographical sized country in the United States that, many parts of our country around the Sun Belt, their swim season doesn't stop. But, for a lot of us, I live in a northern state and, May is really the kickoff to that summer season. And it's when we see a lot of backyard pools getting opened, a lot of our public recreation facilities and water parks get opened. And we just see a lot more people as the weather gets warmer across the country wanting to recreate around the water and create, fantastic memories with their family. So having National Water Safety Month at the beginning of the summer season or, at that May time period is just a really great reminder just to, put that topic of water safety front and center for parents, because really this isn't, really challenging information. This is really simple steps that people can do just to keep their family safer this summer.
Sure. I mean, what it comes down to is, drowning prevention is a big thing when it comes to pools. In your experience, what are the most common drowning scenarios that really surprise parents, especially those who think their kids know how to swim and are old enough to be safe?
Yeah, so I'll give you two. One with our littles. What really shocks parents to find out is we all think that, water safety and drowning prevention is a swim time issue. And that is true. It is. We want to make sure that we're practicing, proper safety procedures and practices while our families and our kids are around the water. But what a lot of parents are shocked to find out is, upwards of 70% of our toddler drownings, in the age group where we see drowning as that leading cause of death, a lot of those drownings happen during non-swim times when the child's not expected to be around the water. That backyard pool, really any aquatic or water feature that, I just don't want to focus on the pools. It can also be that pond or creek bed on your property. Those water features are really attractive to young children. They want to go explore those areas. So, making sure there's proper barriers in place and prevent them from accessing that water during an unintended time is really important. And then for the older kids, especially for parents who, believe their kids have really good swimming abilities, we've seen research that parents are, sometimes poor judges of their child's swimming ability. And, so it may be important to kind of revisit swim lessons or just, kind of make sure your child is really, truly skilled in the water, especially as children start to venture outside of our confined water environments, our backyard pools and our public facilities. A lot of our teenagers are going to go start recreating in natural water environments, but it's really important that, kids learn our safe practices for water safety in all environments, starting in the pool. The pool is one of the safest places to learn those skills. Swim lessons are super critical, and making sure kids know their abilities, because once you venture out into natural water, some of the elements change. You could be facing cold water. Some of that water can have currents. You may not have quick help available to you. So just making sure kids are skilled and knowledgeable before they go out to those other environments.
Do you see any kind of correlation or any kind of drowning statistics that really drive home how quickly these kind of tragedies can happen? Who's most at risk here?
Yeah, it's our most vulnerable. I would say, outside of our adults and teenagers who just maybe aren't skilled to be in those environments and maybe overestimate their abilities, it's really our youngest children, our 1 to 4 year olds who just don't recognize that that aquatic environment, if they're not skilled, may present a danger to them. The other one is children with autism. Children with autism are at 160 times more likely to drown than a neurotypical peer. A lot of kids with autism wander or what we call a lope. And again, that aquatic feature is a really attractive environment for them. They really like the feeling of water, but it comes right down to the same thing. We want to get kids skilled in the water as early as possible. Many swim programs start at age 6 months, but the American Academy of Pediatrics now recommends kids can be ready to begin swim lessons right around that first birthday. And Roddy Gaines and I often talk about this and the fact that, no 1 or 2 year old is going to be swimming a perfect backstroke across the pool. But what those 1 or 2 year olds could learn is how to float on their back and just simple survival skills in the water. So if they do reach the water when they're not intended to, or when help might be delayed, we know that they have the skills to at least seek air and stay safer until help can arrive.
Sure. I do know that from my own experience. Like I swam a lot more when I was younger than I do today. And I was swimming recently, and it just dawned on me how perishable a skill that is. I mean, some parents think that once their child knows how to swim, that the risk of drowning is behind them. How do you respond to that mindset?
Yeah, learning to swim is one of the most critical things that we recommend because we have empirical evidence to show that learning to swim reduces the risk of drowning, but it doesn't completely eliminate the risk. And especially with our younger kids, it may take them time to develop those skills. It is a really unique skill that kids have to learn, and that takes time. So, one of the things we recommend is always practicing multiple layers of protection, learning to swim and being proficient in the water, or what we call being competent in the water, is just one of those layers of protection. The use of barriers and having the appropriate pool fencing, door alarms, things like that is considered a layer of protection. Active supervision. And supervision we can really break down into two categories. One I would call more professional supervision, and that would be swimming at a public recreation facility or maybe a water park where there are lifeguards present. And if you're, maybe at a backyard pool or a pool like a condominium or hotel that may not provide lifeguards, making sure there's just that adult water watcher present. Drowning happens very quickly and silently. One of the things I've heard a lot from families who have experienced this is a lot of times they expected that their child would have called out for help, or they would have just known or recognized something visually. And oftentimes it can be silent. A kid falls in the water and they just don't reemerge at the surface. Or if they do reemerge, they quickly get air before they submerge again. And then oftentimes parents, think they'll visually see it, but the reality is it could look like a child's just splashing or playing in the water. So just making sure there's that always supervision, eyes on the kids. And, one thing I have to call out is just a phrase that we use because oftentimes, during the summer season, people will gather at backyard pools. There'll be a family gathering or maybe even a birthday or 4th of July celebration or a kickoff to summer with Memorial Day. And there's just a lot of activity in that backyard environment. And we have a saying that, when everyone is watching the pool, no one's watching the pool. So practicing things like just having an adult water watcher, many organizations, the National Drowning Prevention Alliance, the Pool Safely campaign from the federal government, they all offer free water watcher cards. And these are just little cards that signify, well, I'm holding this or I'm wearing this, it's my responsibility to keep eyes on the water. So just practicing small things like that really can truly reduce that risk and keep everyone safer.
Sure. I mean, we see that happening a lot with, like you said, family get-togethers, big parties like that, where everybody's in the backyard, but some of the parents may be either, scrolling on their social media, or they're looking at a phone or conversating with other adults at the party and not necessarily watching what's happening in the pool. So I definitely understand what you're saying there. One of the things that we've seen and that we've actually gotten feedback from some of our readers, particularly now that becoming renting your pool out is becoming much more popular, is that they don't understand what their liability is. Or I'm not asking you to answer any questions from a insurance standpoint, but even if you don't have small children at home, if you're renting out your pool, what responsibility do pool owners have when it comes to neighborhood safety or hosting guests?
Yeah, it's a great question. One thing I'm going to tout, I was with the National Drowning Prevention Alliance for years, and last summer we developed a rental checklist and a rental kit. Now it's designed for Airbnbs or those type of rentals, but this type of situation is also critical. I mean, just thinking about what information you would want to share to a guest in your home. What are the safety features? Is there a self-closing, self-latching gate that you don't want propped open? How deep is the pool? Residential pools oftentimes don't have depth markers like our public facilities do. So just communicating that information. One of the things I always recommend in those situations is having the physical address of the house or the pool posted on a wall next to a landline phone in the environment because look, we take all these steps to, really prevent any accidents from taking place. And no one wants any type of situation like this to obviously occur. But if it does occur, and, one of the things that, we talk a lot about fatal drowning statistics. The CDC estimates that for every one child that drowns, another 7 or 8 are seen in an emergency department for a non-fatal submersion injury. So, just because, there's no fatality doesn't mean that these situations, couldn't or haven't taken place. So it's just a reminder of the fact that, if a dangerous or, unfortunate situation happens, quick response and just being able to get emergency medical responders on the way as soon as possible really does make a huge difference in the outcome. So, I can tell you, if you're not at your home address, I, often visit hotels or friends. And, if I had to call 911, I don't know what the physical address is. And that slows down the response capabilities of our emergency responders. So just, small things like that, thinking about, all those safety features that you've put in place for your pool and just, want to communicate those to guests. And, if a guest has a question or something comes up, how can they get in contact with you?
Sure. I mean, you're a fountain of knowledge when it comes to this stuff, Adam. And like you said, you were with the NDPA for a while. Now you're bringing that expertise over to the PHTA. What's one of the pool safety mistakes that you see all the time? Something that people just don't think about, but really puts them or their guests at risk.
Yeah, and I'm going to sound like a little bit of a downer at the party here, but really just clearly communicating what your expected rules are. We all like to have fun at these aquatic environments during the summer, but when, kids get to the pool, when a lot of families, when we involve, teenagers and adults, sometimes we start doing things that, just aren't the safest things. Some of the games that we play in the pool, breath holding competitions, all those types of things. Another thing I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is, a lot of our residential pools are not super deep, and we see a lot of diving accidents that way. The American Red Cross recommends that you shouldn't dive headfirst into water. Number one, if you can't clearly see the bottom or don't know that you have a clear entry depth, and they recommend that depth is at least 9 feet deep. I know there are many competitive swimmers, many people out there that do know how to dive effectively into shallow water. But one of the reminders I always give them is, you may know how to safely do that, but does your cousin that's down at the other end of the pool who's 10 years younger than you, do they know how to do that? And when they see you do it, are they going to try and replicate it? So just communicating what those safe pool rules are. You don't necessarily maybe need a posted rule board like you do at a commercial facility, but let people know what the guidelines are. Let people know, even just taking a few minutes to show them, hey, I have a reaching pole. If someone needs help, here's how you utilize it. Here's how you throw the ring buoy to someone. And I know that sounds like kind of that safety demo every time, you get on an airplane and take off, but there's a reason that, commercial airlines do that. And it's because even though we may all know those things, it's just that quick reminder in that situation. So if something does happen, again, we just want to have the best possible outcome.
Sure. I mean, you had a great point there. I mean, my personal pool, we have a house rules sign posted that says no diving. All right. So that's a great point to hit on because I feel like a lot of accidents happen that way. There's been a wave of new pool tech, though. Cameras, alarms, smart devices. Are any of these like genuinely helping reduce drownings? And what should homeowners know about their limitations?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say it's probably too early from a data standpoint to say how effective these systems are at truly reducing the risk of drowning. Just like we've mentioned with layers of protection, I think all of these pieces of technology or technology advancements that are coming out truly are going to be a game changer when it comes to water safety and drowning prevention. But I think we're all still learning about these new technologies, what their capabilities are. I often remind people, though, that not one layer of protection or one piece of technology is going to prevent every drowning in every situation. I'll use the example that there's a lot of AI-driven camera systems coming onto the market, and they've been out there for some time now, but both for residential and commercial pools. At a commercial pool that has lifeguards, those AI systems are designed to really help the lifeguard make sure they don't miss something. Something I always remind people with lifeguards is yes, they have advanced training. Yes, we teach them how to practice patron surveillance and recognize drowning, but they are human and drowning happens quickly and silently. And, those are young adults most oftentimes that are tasked with a really high responsibility job. So really excited to see those types of systems come on the market. But as an example, one of my biggest questions is, what does that change to the psychology of the lifeguard, and how do we have to now educate and train our lifeguards to what these systems do and don't do for them? Because last thing we want is the lifeguard feeling like they're taking a secondary job to the computer system. And in residential pools, I remind people these are really alarms. They're high-tech alarms. They're designed to truly recognize if someone is in danger in the water, if there's a bad situation that's occurred. But that AI system is just going to alarm you that there is, movement in the area when the pool's not in use, or when someone has entered the water or struggling in the water. That doesn't necessarily replace a pool fence that might physically prevent a child from accessing the area, or a door alarm that's going to alert you a little earlier that they've entered that area. I warn people, to the fact that, yes, that camera system may alarm that, something's going on in that area, but what happens if you're not home? What happens if that alarm ends up on your phone? So, just trying to think through again, it's an added piece that's really meant to increase our vigilance around the water and truly, hopefully, recognize these incidents a lot sooner. But they are just one additional piece. But I think they are going to be a game-changing piece, especially as they evolve over the next number of years.
Well, as a leading expert on drowning prevention, can you explain maybe why layered protection, like the concept that we've come up with behind the pyramid of pool safety, it's an infographic that we're going to be releasing with an article that we plan to do for National Pool Safety Month. Why is that so critical when it comes to preventing drownings, especially in residential pools?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, in any type of accident, whether it's, water safety and drowning, automobile accidents, anything, we always talk about a layered approach because, we don't know what the one thing is that's going to prevent the accident from happening. But the more things we put in place to prevent that accident, the more likelihood is that there is a reduction in risk. And in water safety is something for years we've taken a layered approach on. And I love the infographic that you guys have created. Supervision is critically important, but supervision fails. I'll, tell you in most drowning situations, there was an element of supervision that failed. And that, can be on a variety of different folks, but supervision is wildly important, but it is that thing that does break down the most in these situations. Skilling kids, keeping them trained in the water. No one is drown proof, but the reality is teaching them to swim does significantly reduce that risk of drowning. And then, the use of fences and covers for when the pool's not in use, super, super critical. But we want to make sure that it's appropriate barriers. There is specific pool fencing. There's a variety of different types of fencing that pool fencing can come in, but we want to make sure it's at least 4 feet tall, and make sure that it's a self-closing, self-latching gate on that system. Another alternative when the pool's not in use is a safety cover, but the key aspect with the safety cover is it really only does work if it is on the pool. Recommend people get an ASTM F1346 certified pool safety cover to make sure it's weight tested, that no one's going to fall through that cover. And then using other safety devices and being prepared for an emergency, knowing how to help someone who's in danger danger in the water, making sure that person trying to help them doesn't get in danger as well. And again, knowing how to call 911 and getting a rescue on the way. Another great suggestion, and this goes into that layered approach, is learning CPR. Knowing what to do in an emergency and providing early CPR can really make the difference at the end of the day. So this is a fantastic approach to making sure families are just making sure, not just, using one thing, making sure we're using a multi approach to make sure we're keeping our kiddos and our adults safe.
Dr. Katchmarchi, you're a true thought leader on the subject of pool safety and drowning prevention. Thank you for joining us and sharing your insights. Really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Joe. Appreciate it.
As a reminder, National Pool Safety Month is a great time for every pool owner, parent, and professional to double check their safety measures, because one small change could save a life. As always, thank you for listening to the Pool Magazine podcast, your source for the latest pool industry news. Remember to like, share, follow, and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time on another episode of Pool Magazine podcast.
Get everything you need for your next job without the hassle at aquabluemosaics.com. We carry everything from high-quality pool tile, porcelain pavers, grout, fire and water features, and everything in between that you need to get your project done and put some money in your pocket. A literal showroom in the palm of your hand, we are the most powerful tool any pool contractor can have in their pocket. Become an Aqua Pro and save money on every order, get free samples, and have full access to our unmatched customer service. Easy to remember, hard to forget. Visit aquabluemosaics.com.
Welcome back to the Pool Magazine podcast.